It's wonderful to be here. It's particularly wonderful to be here in person. And it's great to see a number of familiar and friendly faces in the audience. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Catherine. I'm the COO at Auto Trader. I've been with the business for about 4 years. I appreciate for many of you in the room, I'm still a relative newcomer to the industry. But what I perhaps lack in automotive experience compared to some of you, I will hopefully make up for with the insights and the consumer research that we have from our platform. So I'm going to talk about 3 things today. I'm going to talk about, firstly, some of the big changes that we're seeing that are impacting car buying, both the consumer side and the retailer side. It's been an unprecedented 18 months, and we believe that many of the changes that we've seen are here to stay. I'm then going to touch on the outlook. So what trading context and conditions can we all expect for the coming months? And then finally, I'm going to give a bit of a snippet of what's going to follow in more detail and touch on 2 of the big themes that we think are going to shape the future beyond the next few months, which are digitization and electrification. So firstly, kicking off with some of the changes that we're seeing in consumers and retailer behavior when it comes to car buying. So there are 4 themes I'm going to touch on today. Firstly, there's no doubt that consumers' attitudes towards vehicle ownership have changed and feel like they've changed permanently as a result of the pandemic. And actually, this is, I think, a great news story for the industry. Secondly, there's no doubt that those retailers that responded to that and adopted a digital-first approach have capitalized on the consumer opportunity that's been there. Consumers are thinking digital first when it comes to car buying, and the retailer response to that has been incredible, was incredible during the pandemic, and those retailers are achieving more. Finally then, more than ever, with the turbulent and ever-changing markets we're seeing, those retailers that are leading with digital and leading with data and thinking about data and all of their decision-making are winning and gaining share. So just to expand on each of those in a bit more detail. Firstly, when we ask consumers, and we've asked them consistently since the start of the pandemic, pretty much every month in since the start, 30% of them are telling us that they care more about owning a car. Owning a car has become an essential purchase and an essential ownership asset for many consumers. It was always important, but it's been elevated to new heights. Interestingly, within that, the subset of consumers that we believe has been most impacted are the 18 to 24-year-old age cohort. So Generation Z, which many commentators, as recently as a few years ago, has written off as ever being interested in owning a car. But we're seeing 500,000 more consumers in that age cohort on Auto Trader at the moment. And we think their attitudes towards ownership have been hugely impacted by the last 18 months. Secondly, we're still seeing about 11% of consumers, specifically in market, telling us they're there to avoid going on public transport. So that sense of personal space and the safety aspects of travel that have been changed by the pandemic, that hasn't changed yet for consumers, and we're not sure it will actually, certainly for some time yet. And finally, and linked to that point, we are still hearing from consumers that for many, those that are perhaps more anxious about getting back into the office or getting back into retail environments, the presence of COVID safety measures is really reassuring to them and is having an impact on where and how they're thinking about where they might make purchases from. So moving on to the second theme, which is that consumers are thinking digital first. So we all saw during the pandemic, and we all experienced, I think, in our own daily lives, the convenience of buying online. And it just became something we did in more categories more often. And what's interesting is this consumer behavior hasn't reset as we've emerged from the latest lockdown. So that step change that we saw during the pandemic has remained. So in Q2 of this year, we're still seeing consumers across all retail categories buying online and buying online at a higher level than they ever have before. In automotive, we've also seen a step change in the number of consumers when we ask them about their appetite to buy online. 61% are now telling us that actually they would consider buying online, and they do find it appealing when we bring to life what a buying journey might look like in a digital environment. So not surprisingly, we've seen this through our audience performance on Autotrader. So we're still tracking up in terms of visits to our platform at about 30% versus the levels we were seeing in 2019. So huge growth to consumers on our platform. And we're seeing those consumers spend more time, engage more, and look to do more jobs on our platform than ever before. This is probably highlighted most clearly when we look at our leads data. So we're still delivering 50% more leads to retailers than we were in 2019, and we're delivering double the number of new car leads than we were last year. And when we dig into this lead data and look at those jobs that consumers are trying to do, whether it's a reservation or booking an appointment or a test drive or finding out more about the car, its condition, availability before they visit a forecourt, many of those jobs are now the first point of call for a consumer will be online. It will be the digital journey that they can go on. They're not going to turn up on a forecourt, and 80% of them are telling us they now won't turn up on a forecourt unless they've made contact with the retailer in advance and validated and got confidence and reassurance over some of those questions. Some of the jobs that consumers are doing have also evolved and changed as a result of the pandemic. There was a lot of debate during various lockdowns about unaccompanied test drives and the role they may or may not play. Well, a combination of that and then the very significant investment we've seen from some of the online retailers in promoting money-back guarantees, warranties, and service bundles has shifted consumers' expectation of what they want from a test drive. And over 40% are now telling us that actually their preference would be to either have a test drive at home or to have an extended test drive period when they can really experience the product and get to know it better. Talking of test drives have also historically been one of the biggest barriers for consumers buying online. It's been one of the biggest blockers to consumers completing that digital journey. They want to experience the product. Well, now, with the emergence of money-back guarantees as an important part of that service proposition, 60% of consumers are saying, actually, if there's a money-back guarantee in place, they feel quite comfortable not needing or perhaps going without a test drive because they know and can commit with confidence that they can experience that product before having to validate the purchase. So big shifts in how consumers are thinking about that buying journey. We've then also seen a huge response from the retailer community to some of these consumer changes. And when we group retailers on Autotrader, we take the 12,000, 13,000 or so that we work with, and we put them into buckets based on the digital retailing products that they use with us. The top quartile here, the red bar, is those retailers that are taking most, if not all, of those digital retailing products, whether that's home delivery, click and collect, or our market extension product. The light blue bar is then those retailers taking the smallest number of those products. And you can see retailers that have embraced digital are delivering a stock turn of over twice as high as those that have embraced the smallest number of digital retailing products. It's kind of turning stock, the difference is turning stock at 11 times a year versus 5 to 6 times for that lower quartile. So a huge performance gap is emerging. Finally, and the last point I wanted to make on what behaviours we've seen that have changed, this is probably the most consistent theme that we've focused on in our webinars, in our forums over the last 18 months, and that is being data-led and using data to inform decisions. There's been a number of moments over the last 18 months where some commentators, some analysts has predicted that the market's going to collapse, that there's going to be a huge reset of pricing. And actually, we've come out each month, shared the data, focused on the data and said, look, just follow the data, look at what the market's telling you and respond only when you feel you need to. And retailers that have done that, you can see from the right-hand chart, when you look at the first and last price position on the y-axis versus how long retailers are taking to sell cars, those retailers that are coming to market day one, the blue line, and pricing to market are consistently delivering the best stock turn. And actually, they're exiting the market at the most compelling price position as well. So more than ever, given the uncertainty, given the volatility we are seeing in pricing and in the data, being data-led is the right approach. So moving on, just to touch on the outlook and how we're thinking about the trading conditions that we might all be experiencing for the coming months. Now, our insight team, run forecasts for the new and used car market, and we update these very regularly. And the biggest correlation we see in the market transaction levels are with consumer confidence and the unemployment rate. Well, the good news is that consumer confidence has never been so high. So we're back to above pre-pandemic levels. A combination of consumers saving during lockdowns, of actually a stronger economic recovery than many had forecast, means consumer confidence is looking very positive. Equally, when it comes to unemployment, the other big macro factor, unemployment levels are at historical all-time lows. And for any of you that have read the news in the last few days, the rhetoric and the sentiment is all actually around labour and skill shortages rather than huge concerns about mass unemployment. So if we plot those two macro factors and look at the correlation between them and where new car transactions trade historically, based on that level of consumer confidence and demand, we would have expected to see a new car market of about 2.4 million transactions this year. Now, clearly, as we're all living and experiencing, we've revised that forecast down to 1.8 million based on the supply shortages that we're seeing. But it does highlight quite the unconstrained demand that is there and the 600 or so transactions that we would have expected to happen in a more normal supply-side market. This phenomenon and the impacts of the new car transaction levels is going to flow through and have significant implications for the used car market in the coming years. So we've plotted here the new car transaction levels and how they will flow through to the size of the used car market in future years. And if you take the light blue line, which is the 3 to 5 year old age cohort of vehicles, you can see that if you flow through the new car transaction volumes, you end up with a used car market for that age group in 2023 that is about 25 to 26% smaller than it would have been in 2019. So huge implications and potentially factors to think about around sourcing, because the sourcing environment is going to be hugely competitive as a result of this change. The good news for used car transactions is that for those consumers that aren't able to find the new car that they want, we believe much of that demand will flow through to used. So consumers are telling us, about half of them, that they're not prepared to wait for more than 4 weeks to get their next new car, which in the current market is not very long at all, based on some of the production delays that we're hearing from manufacturers. 75% of them are then also telling us that if they can't source that new car within that desired time frame, they will look to the used market. So 75% of would-be new car buyers will convert to used. That's a huge opportunity for retailers to convert those consumers. And it does mean that of that 600,000 new car transactions, we're expecting about 200,000 of those consumers to become used car buyers in this year. So that all leads us to a very positive and actually a much more positive forecast for the used car market than many other industry projections out there. So we're expecting it to be an almost record year of about 8 million transactions. And actually, if you look at our proxy sold data and how we've been trading since we emerged in June, the data more than supports this kind of trajectory and this level of overall used car transactions. So trading environment, lots of reasons, I think, to continue to feel positive about the demand side, certainly for the coming months. Finally, I just wanted to touch on two of the bigger themes that we think are going to shape the future of the industry, and probably how shape all of our response to them will shape the path that then we're all set on for the coming years. Firstly, just touching again on digitisation. So we don't believe that we're suddenly going to be in a world where the majority of consumers are completing an end-to-end online transaction in the automotive industry. It's somewhere between 1% to 2% of consumers are there today. We're expecting and we believe that the majority of consumers are going to continue to experience or want to go on an omnichannel retailing journey. So they might start their journey on a dealer website or on Auto Trader by placing a reservation or by booking a test drive. They may then go on to complete different jobs at the forecourt, the finance application, or the test drive. And our job, and I think the job for most retailers, is to combine the best of digital with the best experience that the forecourt can provide. because for most consumers, that is going to be the right answer for their purchase journey. One of the big changes that we saw during the pandemic was that suddenly, by embracing digital, any retailer had the ability to sell anywhere. So those traditional boundaries and areas of sales that were defined by geography or by regions that you would sell in, they've gone, they've broken down, and we can see that retailers can conquest, can acquire, can access new consumers that historically, with a forecourt-driven model, wouldn't have been available. We've been supporting this through our market extension product, and we're seeing retailers that have embraced that product typically accessing 3 times the level of consumers and audience than they would have done by embracing that notion that you can extend reach and you can sell anywhere if you embrace those digital solutions. So our message, I think, to retailers continues to be to think digital first. There's now a segment of consumers that are ready and do want to buy online. And whilst it is small today, and it's a relatively low percentage of transactions, that percentage of transactions and that consumer segment is only going to grow. So those that move now and move early will have a competitive advantage against those that don't, and will be well positioned to conquest and to do more. There's also opportunities, we believe, to move from being a very sales and commission-led model to it being more about the product and more about the consumer experience and delivering the right journey for each individual consumer. So just touching on electrification before I hand over to Anita to do a fuller job on the impacts and implications. The good news is that the market for electric cars, we believe, is in the best shape that it's ever been in. We're seeing 3 times more makes and models available to consumers than we were 18 months ago. We're seeing more than 3 times the level of advertising investment from manufacturers in the product. And as a result, we're seeing a higher level than ever of new car sales being made up of EVs. We're seeing this very much reflected on Auto Trader as well. Interest and intent towards EVs is growing and is growing very, very rapidly. We're now seeing 1 in 6 new car consumers on Auto Trader engaging with electric product and content. However, and interestingly, it's still not converting at the level that we would expect it to. So conversion from a consumer looking at an advert or exploring a vehicle on Auto Trader to a lead into a retailer is still half the rate that we see on an ICE vehicle equivalent. We think a lot of this is explained by the nature of the make and models that are available today. We've looked here at the average price of a vehicle versus the percentage of advert views or consumer engagement that we see on Auto Trader. Now, for ICE vehicles, 25% of the demand of the advert views that we see are for vehicles that cost less than £20,000. So about a quarter of what we see is for sub £20,000 vehicles. When we look at electric vehicles, there are only 4 electric vehicles that you can buy that are worth less than £20,000, and they're typically the micro minis, so like the Renault Twizy, which for most consumers are probably not going to be a viable choice. This is highlighted even more acutely, I think, when we look at some specific examples, and specifically if we look at the volume end of the market. So if you take volume hatchbacks and the Corsa as an example, the typical retail price for an ICE Corsa will be about £25,000. And the electric equivalent is £30,000, which is just a bridge too far, a gap too far for most consumers to be able to step to. The differences are less acute when you get into the more premium makes and models, but we're still talking about a £10,000 to £15,000 gap, which again is a step too far or a bridge too far for most consumers. Similarly, when we then look at the geographical mix of where and how consumers are searching for electric vehicles, there's a huge correlation at the moment between postcodes that are in wealthier income demographics and EV intent. So today, it's typically consumers from higher income bands and a slight skew towards slightly older consumers. They are the consumers that can access and are engaging with EVs. Someone in our business described it the other day as the reserve of the rich. I'm not sure it's quite that extreme, but there is definitely an income skew. So it's no surprises then when we ask consumers in our research, what are the big barriers that they're facing when it comes to buying an EV? Cost and affordability comes out very highly, as does the lack of charging infrastructure. And charging infrastructure, we believe, is an issue that can be addressed, but there's still a lot more work to do. There are about 25,000 charging points in the UK today, and depending on who you talk to, we need somewhere between 10 times and 100 times the level of charging points to get to a point where we can support a market that is at the level that the government wants to reach by 2030. Now, actually, if you look at the number of consumers that have access to off-street parking, about 60%, if you factor in the work that businesses, retailers, and other organisations are doing, the bridge is achievable. We can get there, but it just needs a real concerted effort to help consumers with this range anxiety challenge, which is undoubtedly there today and still cited as one of those biggest factors. So I wanted to share as well our view on the current run rate we're on and how far away we are from hitting that 2030 goal. And we've plotted here both the electric vehicle share of new car transactions and then the overall share of the UK car park. And if we look at where we are today, despite all the really good progress made that I talked about at the beginning, we're still tracking behind where we need to be. And we're really interested in continuing to track this every few months to see, right, how much progress have we made? How far away are we? How big is the gap that we need to bridge to be able to get there? And there's no doubt when we dig into this data that we're going to need real commitment and I think a different level of commitment from government. We're going to need OEMs to help us address that product gap and production changes to get the costs to be more economical. And for organisations like us, for marketplaces, for consumer brands, there's a huge information and awareness job to be done with consumers. So today, we think democratisation of EVs does remain uncertain, whether it's that product gap that I talked about, the need to change the language to total cost of ownership to enable a fairer comparison, or the work that needs to be done in the used car market, where because of the supply and other support incentives in the new car market, many of you will be experiencing a used market where prices aren't that stable and where actually predicting or being able to commit is difficult. It's still too volatile, and the new car incentives are skewing that performance in that used car market. And until we have a strong, robust, stable used car market for electric vehicles, the new car market ambitions of the government and others are just not going to be fulfilled. So finally, just to wrap up, good news is that all indicators that we look to and all of our consumer data suggest that the very strong demand environment that we're experiencing is not set to change anytime soon. There's no doubt that supply is going to remain tight into 2022, and we think this means that for those retailers being data-driven and focusing on the data, they will be the ones that continue to maximise the margin opportunity that is undoubtedly there. The digital acceleration that we've all experienced and lived over the last 18 months feels like it's here to stay, and retailers that embrace that and embrace that early have an opportunity to gain share. And then finally, electric progress is good, but we believe there's much more for all of us to do to make sure that we are getting to where we need to be by 2030. So the market backdrop is unprecedented. Both the trading conditions, the level of change, I think is more acute, more volatile than we've ever seen before. And there's no doubt with that comes huge challenges that we all need to work through and overcome. But equally, we see huge opportunity to engage consumers in a different buying journey, and huge opportunity from the advent of electric and the progress in electric vehicles. So for us and for retailers and all of us that are ready to grasp it, we believe there's lots of reasons to feel positive as well. Thank you.